Vilnius, Lithuania. The vast Russian military exercises that ended this week showed off a muscular fighting force practicing state-on-state warfare, NATO's deputy military commander said, in one of the first assessments of a large-scale operation that put Russia's neighbors on nervous alert. The Zapad exercise, which rehearsed a conflict along Russia's western borders, showed off a force that was marshalling itself probably more quickly, more efficiently, with this underlying message that if you thought we were in decay, we're not, NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, British General James Everard, said in an interview. The exercise, whose active phase ended Wednesday, is an every 4 years effort that was held this month for the first time since Russia in 2014 annexed Crimea from Ukraine, then sparked war in the eastern part of the country. Because Russia used exercises as cover ahead of both its operations in Ukraine and its 2008 invasion of Georgia, its neighbors were cautious this time as the Kremlin fired up its military machine. Now Western allies are sifting through intelligence reports and starting the arduous work of assessing Russia's military capability, which is deep into a reform that has translated the force from a neglected and struggling group into one that for 2 years has been able to project power into Syria, far from Russia's borders. Everard said that the first formal assessments would likely not be ready before the end of October. But he said that some of the basics of effective large-scale warfare, an ability to pick up and move large numbers of troops, and then command them effectively, were on clear display. You see a recognition in the Russian hierarchy that if you are going to have a foundation of military force behind your stratagem, and I think they do, then it needs to work, he said. Military analysts also said the exercise was a chance for the Kremlin to shoot a message straight to the Pentagon and its allies that Russia has a formidable fighting force capable of mobilizing across its enormous territory, and it needs to be reckoned with. But if the exercises showed off a Russian military that is much better trained and equipped than at any point since the Soviet collapse, the scenario of the exercises, an enemy from the West tries to overthrow the government in Moscow's ally, Belarus, and is beaten back, also may reveal Russia's greatest handicap. Moscow says it is convinced it is under threat of assault by a hostile force in the West that is determined to bring its military to Russia's borders. This, as President Vladimir Putin sees it, has already been done in the Baltics. He believes the United States and NATO were the instigators of street protests that forced Ukraine's president to flee to Russia in 2014. Viewed from that perspective, Zapad was intended to reinforce a point Putin made in December, that Russia is stronger than any aggressor. Russia is acting on a faulty threat assessment and seeks to fashion a military response to largely imaginary threats and challenges that are not military in nature, said Vladimir Frolov, an independent foreign policy analyst based in Moscow. It's all about strategic messaging of coercion and compellence directed at the US and NATO, to prevent things the West has no intention of doing or the capability to accomplish. NATO says it is a defensive alliance and creates no military threat to Russia. Many NATO officials disbelieve the Kremlin's stated concerns, saying they are an excuse to practice for war against the West. Although Russia publicly declared that the exercises were small enough to exempt them from international transparency obligations, most Western observers said that the concurrence of drills and joint exercises across Russia's vast territory made them far larger than what was formally announced. The Russian and Chinese navies drilled in the east. The Russian military exercised in Central Asia. Bomber flights ranged over the Norwegian Sea. Paratroopers were active far above the Arctic Circle. Adding a nuclear edge to the wargaming, Russia carried out 2 tests of its new intercontinental ballistic missile, the RS-24, the first 2 days before Zapad began and the second on the culminating day of the exercise. Western officials are still trying to estimate how many troops took part in the exercises. Some security officials and analysts ventured initial guesses that Zapad may have been a smaller exercise than other major efforts in recent years, although they said it was still a significant event. It was effectively a national-level military operation, said Igor Sutyagin, a senior research fellow for Russian studies at the Royal United Services Institute, a London-based security think tank. He said his initial estimate was that between 65,000 and 72,000 troops took part. Putin, who viewed a mock battle involving tanks, missiles, air power and paratroopers at a firing range in Luga, northwestern Russia,